Thank you, Chairman Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee. Today we are discussing LB 980, which would provide for release for medical treatment, change provisions relating to medical parole, and provide for parole eligibility for persons serving sentences of life imprisonment. I decided to introduce this bill for two very important reasons. The first is that we have a prison overcrowding crisis, which is in part due to lengthy sentences, which has been identified throughout the CJI process. Over the interim, I made it a point to visit multiple prison institutions to better understand this issue. What I found was that many individuals who are serving lengthy sentences are also some of the model citizens that have taken advantage of programming and other resources inside to not only improve themselves, but to also work to assist others to better themselves. I fully understand the concerns of victims and their families, but it's important that we remember this bill is pursuant to incarcerated individuals who pose no risk via the state of their health, and those who are eligible for parole provisions can still be denied. It doesn't say allow them to get access to parole and they're just get let out. They still have to go through the process, and as mentioned earlier in today, I believe if we have a parole board, we have to trust the parole board will make the best decisions. Additionally, there are statistics that show most people convicted of murder who have served a considerable amount of time rarely reoffend. The national average of recidivism for this class is 1.2%. That is the lowest rate of recidivism out of all classes of felonies. This policy would also be supported by the fact that most people age out of criminal behavior later in life. By the age of 40, the rate of recidivism is extremely low, nearly zero for all types of crimes. That makes the practice of offering parole eligibility to persons convicted of homicide a smart on crime policy where the least likely to offend are released when they are safest by statistical accounts, with the highest rate of success. Article 4, Section 3 of the Nebraska Constitution states, "The board or the majority thereof shall have the power to grant parole after conviction and judgment in all cases except for treason and impeachment." Two very specific exceptions are named in this article to indicate that the writers meant for only two exceptions to exist in relation to the power of the parole board. The Separation of Powers Clause, Article 2, Section 1 of the Nebraska Constitution ensures that one branch of government does not encroach upon the powers and duties of another. By failing to provide a means by which to calculate parole eligibility in all cases except treason and impeachment, the legislature, in my opinion, has denied a power granted to the parole board, and thus the statutory scheme as it relates to first-degree murder and parole eligibility is unconstitutional. The second reason for this bill is one that's very close to my heart. It's for a young man by the name of Xavier Valentine that wasn't sentenced to death or life, but in his last days had the criminal justice system deny him of the ability to spend his last days at home with his family. I became aware of his situation towards the end of the last session and tried to do all I can to assist him and his family. In doing so, the parole board and the Department of Corrections played systemic and political football with his life. I was able to visit him at the Nebraska State Penitentiary before he passed. While visiting him, I realized that the report of him being a potential threat to society was unfounded. He was restricted to his bed because of weight gain and the effects of dealing with a terminal illness. This young man spent the last days of his life in pain, being transferred back and forth from the prison to hospital, in which his family was left in the dark many times. His family also spent resources in hopes he would be allowed to spend his last days with them at home. Before I left the state pen, Xavier asked me as I was walking out his room if he was going to die there. I didn't know what to say, and those words have stuck with me and will forever stick with me. Individuals in his situation shouldn't have to suffer because those tasked with making decisions have no political will or empathy to do so, which is why the director must authorize such persons under prescribed conditions as spelled out on page 3, lines 17 to 23, part D. For persons with a terminal illness, permanent incapacity or debilitating medical condition, leave the facility to receive medical care and treatment and return to the same or another facility. Such placement for medical treatment may be for a definite or indefinite period in a hospital, a hospice, or another housing accommodation suitable to the person's medical condition, including but not limited to the person's family's home. I think this bill is important for both reasons. We're going to have an Asian prison population, and as identified in the research and the data from the CJI process, if we don't do nothing about the current population, we are going to be forced to build another prison if we build a prison. Visiting the prisons, you will see that those with the longer sentences are the role models inside. They are the ones doing the peer mentoring. For example, one individual that was doing great inside of NSP got transferred to the juvenile youth facility in Omaha because he was doing such a great job. I'm not saying that these individuals don't need to be held accountable for their actions, but when it clearly shows that the statistics show that these individuals rarely reoffend, we have to look at it. This doesn't guarantee that they will be released, but it at least allows the parole board to look at them and give them a shot. And lastly, I just strongly don't understand, and I didn't understand at the time, why the department and the parole board kept playing ping pong with a young man's life. They deemed him a threat to society, and I went to visit him, and he was stuck in his bed on his last days. That is sad that there is not humans or some type of empathy inside these institutions to see that, understand, somebody committed a crime, there's accountability there, but there has to be a human aspect to this. We can't just keep saying, let's be tough, these people are criminals, let's throw them down the river. A lot of these individuals are improving their lives. A lot of them went in when they were juveniles. By the age, I met a man when I was at Tecumseh, went in when he was like 17. He's 40, and he's one of the best peer mentors inside that facility. Individual, I ask you all, are you the same person you were at the age of 17 that you are at the age of 40? We all change and evolve, and that's what this is for, is to allow somebody the opportunity to evolve as an individual, but also provide a mechanism for those who are terminally ill to be home with their families. Thank you. I'll answer any questions.
Can I just ask, what's the current process? So if somebody is terminal, and let's say they're not eligible time-wise for parole, do we have a furlough process or any kind of a process for hospice?
It was really unclear. They were saying they could call an emergency meeting when he was deemed terminally ill. And then the doctor, for whatever reason, went back on that determination and said he wasn't terminally ill. And it wasn't clear at all.
Complicated it.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator DeBoer.
How long of a sentence was the young man in? Did you say his name was Xavier?
Yes. I forget the length of his sentence, but I knew he wasn't within his 2-year, 10 or 30. He wasn't within his 2-year window, but he would have been eligible, I think, in about 4 more years.
What was he convicted of?
It was for a gun shooting, I believe.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we have some proponent testimony.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Senator McKinney. Are you going to close?
Yeah.
Good evening.
Good evening. Senator Lathrop, members of the committee, I'm Joe Nigro, Joenigro. I'm the Lancaster County Public Defender. I appear on behalf of my office and Nebraska Criminal Defense Attorneys Association in support of LB 980. I want to thank Senator McKinney for introducing this bill. LB 980 would expand the ability of people in the custody of DCS to be released for medical treatment. It would allow the possibility of parole for people serving long prison sentences. It doesn't mean that those people will be paroled, but the chance of parole is a really important behavioral motivator for people serving sentences. And release on parole leads to a lower chance of recidivism for those who are released rather than people who just jam their time and are released without supervision. So for those reasons, I would urge the committee to advance LB 980. Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any questions. Thanks for being here, Mr. Nigro.
You're welcome.
My name is TaMika Mease. And
Can you spell out for us, please?
yes, TaMika, T-A-M-I-K-A. Last name Mease, M-E-A-S-E. I represent North Omaha Community Partnership in Omaha, Nebraska, and also the family of Xavier Lakiel Valentine. I am in support of LB 980, and I do thank Senator Terrell McKinney for presenting. Xavier Valentine was 22 years old when he passed away on August 18th of 2021. He passed away as an inmate of the Nebraska State Penitentiary. His last moments on this earth were spent in a hospital room, chained to his bed, in a coma with no brain activity, no brain function at all. On approximately March 28th, 2021, or at least that's when the family was notified, Xavier had been diagnosed with a rare cancer, a rare brain cancer called glioblastoma. It is a rare brain cancer. It is an aggressive brain cancer, and at that point, he was at stage 4. It was determined as a result of testing because Xavier was found in his area within the prison unresponsive. He had suffered a stroke, which the progressive state of the cancer does cause strokes and seizures amongst other symptoms. So Xavier was on life support during that time back at the end of March. His family was told that he had about 6 months to live, given the progression of the tumor, the size. They also they did radiation, and the tumor did not shrink. It actually grew. From the time that he was first hospitalized in March to the next time he was hospitalized a couple of months later, the tumor had actually grown in size. For this particular cancer, the survival time is 12 to 18 months, and only 25% of the patients survive more than 1 year. The family had petitioned for a compassionate release upon hearing that news, and the hearing was set for June 26th of 2021. Xavier passed away on July 22nd of 2021. The hearing that was originally set for June 26, 2021 was rescinded. Xavier was given notice via letter, and his mother was given notice over the phone that same week, just a few days prior to the hearing, and saying that his condition had improved. That was the reason with speaking with the parole board member, that his condition had improved. The only condition that had improved at that point was him having a stroke. He went from being on life support to having a tranq and a feeding tube installed in his stomach. He could not do anything on his own, and he still had the terminal illness, which was a stage 4 cancer. Xavier.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
We have to stop when we
Okay.
get to the red lights.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Was there a process in place? I understand that the doctor said, no, he's getting better, and so that they use that as an excuse to cancel the hearing. But if the hearing had gone on as scheduled, would he have had an opportunity? Had the doctor not recanted? the
Most
prognosis?
definitely, and they had already started the process prior to the hearing with members from the parole board visiting with the mother. They had actually denied her residence where she was originally staying at, saying that it was in a high crime rated area and that she would need to move for consideration of placement.
But here's my point.
Uh-huh.
Is there already a process in place for this kind of compassionate release? And,
There- uh-huh.
and it requires some medical support and you didn't get it? Or we don't have a process at all and we need to do something about that? Obviously, we can't do anything about the
Right.
doctor.
I think that going forward, there is, from my understanding, a process in place, but that it's not practiced often enough for them to do that process correctly and for everyone to do their due diligence. There was a lot of bouncing back and forth between the hospital, the parole board, and corrections. And the prison placed the inmate at Brian West, and it was Brian West, healthcare professional, stating that he had a terminal illness. And it's hard to believe that that information was communicated to the family, but not to corrections.
Okay, one more question for you, at least coming from me. When you said the problem turned out the doctor said no, the conditions got better, so that became the reason for canceling the hearing. Was that a doctor from the Department of Corrections or was that a doctor from Brian?
That was from the doctor from the Department of Corrections.
So was that Dr. Deal?
Senator Terrell
Okay,
McKinney
that's all
can
right.
answer
I'll
that
ask you.
question.
You've answered my questions and I appreciate that. I do not see any other questions. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience.
Okay.
And was this a family member?
Yes, he was. If I could add just one more thing that is very important. Xavier Valentine's tumor is not what killed him. It was a staph infection that he developed from his feeding tube because the feeding tube fell out and the staff put it back in non-sterile. And he developed sepsis. And that was his final cause of death, and we were told that they could not handle his care. So that should definitely be taken into consideration when you have terminally ill inmates in our system, and their care could be very overwhelming for the staffing, especially with our staffing situation that we're facing today.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you again. My name is still Fran Kaye, F-R-A-N-K-A-Y-E. And I am testifying for LV 980, not for any group, but as a Department of Corrections volunteer for more than a quarter of a century. I did not know Mr. Valentine. I have known other people who were in care in the hospital and sometimes with not really great choices. LV 980 moves us toward a safer and more just society by allowing for more medical parole and by introducing parole opportunity into life and virtual life sentences for incarcerated persons who have served more than 25 years. Canada has such a system, with 25 years the maximum sentence, except for a very few dangerous offenders who are individually adjudicated as posing unacceptable risk to the rest of the society. Most persons serving 25-year sentences are actually released before that date. Canadian crime rates are very similar to American rates, but the murder rate in Canada is half that of the United States. And the incarceration rate is less than half that of the United States. In fact, the incarceration rate in Canada is about 1/5 of the incarceration rate in the state of Nebraska. The well-respected sentencing project recommends a 20-year maximum sentences before parole eligibility in the U.S. overall. Most persons serving life sentences are no likelier than anyone else to be irretrievably evil. Murders are usually committed by persons whose first exposure to violence was their own victimization. People with long sentences, as Senator McKinney said, usually age out of crime, and many, through coming to terms with their own acts of lethal or near-lethal violence, develop extraordinary compassion and keen insight into the costs and causes of crime. While some survivors of horrendous violence and murder victims' families and friends believe it is an insult to victims to ever consider freedom for persons serving life sentences, others recognize that the good these compassionate offenders can do for the community is a far better monument to their loved ones than the cold comfort of perpetual punishment. As Senator McKinney said, many of the people serving life are the leaders within the prison. Their impact and inspiration would be even greater if they were allowed to parole and still work inside the prisons, as MHA members already do. And their positive impact on interrupting and redirecting street violence cannot be overestimated. Fewer than half of Omaha murders are ever solved, so punishment and incarceration are never part of the equation. How much better it would be to prevent these murders through the work of people who had reformed their own lives. Even parolees who just worked and minded their own business and lived normal lives would counter the allure of gangs and the despair of young people who see no future for themselves in our current society. I support LB 980. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today and your testimony.
My name is Alexander Rahe, Alexander common spelling, Rahe, R-A-H-E, and I appear today in support of LB 980. Before I begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a former resident of the Department of Correctional Services. Since my time there, I finished an undergraduate degree in criminal justice and psychology, and I will be finishing a master's degree here shortly with my candidacy for a PhD through UNO. So I come before you not only as an experienced inmate, I come before you as an academic with a little bit of information and research. I think that this bill will greatly enhance the mission of the Department of Correctional Services and bring more humane treatment to the offenders that are currently in their care. A little bit of facts for you. As of 2018, there are 45 states with medical parole laws. Nebraska is one of those states. However, as previously discussed, the issues around medical parole are somewhat ambiguous and certainly confusing and complicated. The problem that most inmates experience that have serious medical conditions, and many of them do, I was one of them, is that they can only be released in Nebraska under a very narrow set of situations and circumstances. And with the current statute stating that it must be a determination that it's a terminal illness or a permanent incapacity, there's a lot of question as to who makes that decision, whether it's a team of people, whether it's a single doctor, and whether or not there's any sort of appellate process for that determination. In the case of Mr. Ballantyne, whom I did not know and was not aware of prior to today, if it was a department doctor that made that determination, what recourse does anyone have? Many inmates within the system constantly hear, well, there's no appeal for this for the safety and security of the institution. If this man was determined to be a threat, I would love to understand more about what constitutes a threat. If he was bedridden with a feeding tube, I can't imagine that he was going to run out and commit more crime if he was released on compassionate release. Furthermore, the inclusion for sentencing to allow parole for somebody who had served 25 years or more. Organizations like the Marshall Project, the Sentencing Project, and even the United States Sentencing Commission have all published reports over the past decade that shown that offenders that reach a certain stage of life have essentially aged out of criminal behavior. And I know Senator McKinney touched on this as well. Specifically, the Sentencing Commission has studied recidivism since the passage of the Sentencing Reform Act in 1984, and they have consistently included that the age of the offender at the time of their release is directly related to their recidivism. Obviously, the older they are, the less likely they are to commit crime. There are many other states, including California, Alabama, Mississippi, Oklahoma, that have some form of consideration. And bringing us in line with other states' best practices is really the goal of this bill, and I believe that it should be advanced out of this committee and supported by the legislature.
Okay. Well, it's always great to see somebody that's a former resident doing so well.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here and your concern. Hopefully you're going to be involved in providing mental health care for some of the people that are incarcerated or on their journey.
Well, I'm hoping that this is the first step in my future of advocacy, working to try to bring light to situations where there's not a lot of information as far as what life is like inside. If I may, when I was sentenced, my judge told me specifically that I needed mental health treatment because I was in the middle of a mental health crisis when I caught my crime. I was sentenced to a term of 2 to 12 years, and I never once received a single day of mental health therapy within the Department of Correctional Services.
Okay.
So the whole purpose of sending me to prison was to receive mental health and put me on parole. I received no mental health, and I kept getting denied for my programming, well past the statutory requirement for it to be provided to me, to the point where I jammed my number. And it wasn't for a lack of trying. I actually took the Department of Corrections to federal court to receive my programming.
That was in Nebraska?
Correct.
What year were you?
I
first in?
entered the system in 2013, and I left in 2019.
Okay. Well, there's an example of when people are worried about parole eligibility being the same thing as the day you get to leave, and it's not.
No, and it's misunderstood by many people, just the nature of how our parole board works and how much of what they do is done in secrecy. Their decisions are so arbitrary and so closely held that my family actually hired a consultant, and he reached out to the Board of Parole, and he received a no comment. He was hung up on twice, and he got a letter saying that they would not be sharing any information with them.
Okay.
Whether or not that's, it's everybody's experience, it was certainly mine. And as a result, I actually jammed my number after being told repeatedly that I had to take programming that they weren't allowing me to take.
Okay. Thanks for being here.
My name is Timothy Lopez, Timothyhlopez. I spent most of my life in the Department of Correctional Services. While I was incarcerated, I met a lot of people to help transform my life. David Ware sentence began on 6/1984. Michael Jackson sentence began on 4/1993. Robert Norfolk sentence began 12/1984. It costs about $45,000 a year to keep a guy incarcerated under the terms of life without parole. Combined, they have over 105 years of incarceration, equaling out to about $4,725,000 spent over the years to keep them locked up without a chance of parole. There will be times that I feel like my life didn't matter and I just wanted to take myself out of this world by the ways of suicide. I wouldn't trust to talk to no one. I would look to Dave for help and guidance. I would never get judgment nor negative feedback from him. He has impacted my life in ways that I can't even really explain with the amount of words. I was released out of prison on 1/28/2020. At the time I released, David Ware was housed on the mental health unit at the Lincoln Correctional Center. Dave Ware was a medical porter who was asked to help with individuals who have difficulties with mental health. Dave would partake in programs called the Restorative Justice Intervention, teaching people the impacts of their harm they displayed unto others. This program takes an empathetic approach to the impact of our harms. Dave has become a trusted individual within the system. Dave has been a mentor to myself and others, and he is a real true father figure to most inside the system. I credit most of my success to Dave Ware. Dave has been a peer facilitator for the Restorative Justice Intervention Program for quite some time. Dave was acknowledged for his actions for rushing into action to save a female caseworker who was being attacked by another inmate. The caseworker was said to have called Dave Ware and the other inmate a hero who saved her life. Michael Jackson. I met him at the Omaha Correctional Center. He knew about my violent past. Once I was able to meet him, we took a walk and he told me that I am one of the ones that he believes in could be something of success once I would be released. There would be days that I didn't want to do anything and I didn't even want to live life. I was reminded of my purpose in life. I would try to sleep my days from the confines of the system and was ready to cave and give up. Michael would wake me up. To help him with dealing with education. After some times, I would eventually find out that it wasn't for him, but yeah, it was for myself. Michael would partake in programs called the Restorative Justice Intervention, teaching people the impact of harms they displayed onto others. This program takes an empathetic approach to impact of our harms. Michael has been a very trusted individual within the system. Michael has been a mentor to myself and others. He is a real-life father figure to most inside of the system. I credit most of my success to Michael. Michael has been a peer facilitator for the Restorative Justice Intervention Program for quite some time. Michael is housed at the Youth Detention Center here in Nebraska to help guide at-risk youth and get them prepared to enter to the adult facility. This is a person that's doing life without parole because of choices, but we're trusting them with our kids, okay? And then Robert.
Lopez, I see you have a third person you want to talk about, but we got to
Right, for sure.
enforce that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And,
But I appreciate your testimony.
All right, that's fine.
I did meet Mr. Jackson at a RISE program at the Omaha Correction Center, and I'm pleased to hear that he's now being a mentor at the youth center.
For sure.
That's somebody trying to find a purpose from on the inside.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah. Senator DeBoer.
Thanks, Senator Lathrop. So I remember one time you came to testify before us, I don't remember when it was, and you mentioned these three gentlemen before, and you said that you had some difficulty with contacting them because of whatever the terms of your release were. Have you been able to stay in contact with them now?
So I was on parole at the time. I discharged off of parole September of last year. So I wasn't able to engage in contact legally by the parole's binding in rules and everything else. But I'm also a volunteer for a lot of community outreach programs as well as community programs that help facilitate programs in the prison. So I was able to have like a third party contact, like basically, hey, how's Tim doing? Oh, Tim's doing good. Well, how's Michael doing? Michael's doing good, and those things. And so I was able to have that type of communication. But now that I'm off of parole, I received a notice from an individual that knows them as well they said, continue on your straight path and keep doing what you're doing, man. Because, I'm sorry. But because they said that on the image of what they could be if they was out here. But they don't have a chance, and to be honest, they deserve to get out when I was released. I didn't deserve to get out. My past in the prison system, as you know from seeing me in segregation, was straight violence. I was so caught up in the gangs and so caught up in trying to hurt people that I didn't care. And then eventually it caught up to me. And then when I started to care, I tried to kill myself, like for real. And I was in a coma, and had to fight through that, had to learn how to write again, walk again, talk again. They told my mom I had 10 hours to live. They came in and they wouldn't even let them take pictures of me. And I spent majority of my time in segregation for staff assaults, for assaults on other inmates, and breaking the rules and regulations. These individuals who don't have a chance at getting out were individuals who they would literally, the Department of Correctional staff would call to come assist to help me calm down because they knew if they engaged with me, there was going to be violence. They knew there was going to be some type of action that was going to inflict harm. But these guys don't have a chance to get out.
Well, your continued success on the outside now is a testament to them and the work that they do. So we appreciate you coming and talking to us.
Thank
I really do.
Thank you. Thanks for being here again. Good evening.
Good evening, how you doing? I want to thank Senator McKinney for bringing forth the bill. My name is Yshall Davis. Yshall is spelled Y-S-H-A-L-L. And I have a big brother in the state penitentiary. He's doing life with no parole for a crime that he committed when he was 18. He was sentenced at 19. And for being sentenced at 19, he is not really qualified for the laws that allow teenagers to be reconsidered for lesser sentence. So he's in bad shape. So I'm totally against life with no parole, especially for the felony murder rule when you didn't kill anyone in the first place. In my opinion, life with parole is a death sentence. I have to question, is there even a need to rehabilitate or reform a person that's never going to return to society? You know, you lawmakers, you speak of rehabilitation, reform, but you fail to mention re-enslavement, and that's what I see, a enslavement system. An extermination center can only manufacture corpse. These penitentiaries, people are living in body bags. That's what y'all do. The business of imprisonment is the business of America. All lawmakers who believe in and are proponents of lengthy prison sentences, they should go on the inside for 25 days straight. I mean, you just throwing out 25 years. Won't one of y'all lawmakers go sit in there for 25 days and see what these individuals actually go through? I mean, they're in life and death situations every day. I haven't been on the inside, but I know enough people to know that they are in life and death situations every day. And some of these crimes are minuscule. Some of them are major, I get it, but they're all in the same playing field. America has been coined the home of the free, but it has the world's largest population of prisoners serving life sentences. Instead of leaving the penitentiaries in a body bag, the humane thing to do is release some of these individuals for medical treatment. Mass incarceration today is the mathematical consequence of a grim series of legislative enactments, each bringing more pain to our communities than the last. I personally think it should be a crime for your penitentiaries to be over 150% capacity. That's criminal in itself. I read in a religious book one time where it says a person should improve him or herself every 10 years, saying at 20 years old, you shouldn't be the same person you were at 10 years old. 40 years old, you shouldn't be the same person you was at 30 years old. So this unjust penal system, it refuses to recognize this individual's growth. And it's like, what are you guys doing? I mean, are we trying to experience physical slavery in America right here in 2022? Because for y'all to be talking about, every year it's another 150 people going in. I heard Frank's come to a community meeting, if that's his name. He said they were talking about the new penitentiaries, and he's like, basically already has an assessment that most of the people in the penitentiary will not even be leaving in the next 5 years because of these lengthy sentences. When you give a person 20, 25, 35, 50, you're giving people 200, 300 years. Make that make sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chairman Lathrop and members of the committee. I'm Shakur Abdullah, ShakurAbdullah. Testifying on behalf of the Community Justice Center, Restorative Justice Agency here in Lincoln, mentioned by Lopez. He mentioned some of the guys that has helped shape him into the person that he is today. Those very individuals help us teach some of our restorative justice programs as we go back in. They are a tremendous asset to us as we go back in and perform those services, and we definitely believe that they would be the same or possess the same type of character outside as they do inside, as testified by Mr. Lopez. So we definitely support that part of the bill, the 25-year eligibility of people serving life sentences. We also support the medical parole as well. Just in concluding, I just want to say that, I'm one of the individuals that is envisioned by this bill. Sentenced to prison to die, 17 years old. Didn't get out until I was 58. It was a very lengthy stay. But for individuals like those that Lopez described intervening in my life, I would have been a very different person. So I don't think that the humanity of other people should ever be diminished just because they are incarcerated. To quote Brian Stevenson, none of us are the worst mistake that we have ever made. We have all made mistakes. But are we going to be defined by those mistakes that we make for the rest of our life? Some would like to relegate us to that position from now on. But that doesn't have to be the case. I appreciate the opportunity to go back into places that I was once incarcerated to provide a certain sense of hope. I think that the 25-year eligibility would help to ensure that. If you take a person's hope away, you end up with a very dangerous situation for everybody. With that, thank you very much. I will answer any questions.
Okay. We appreciate your testimony.
My name is Nature Villegas, first name Nature, last name Villegas, Villegas. I threw my speech away because I only have 3 minutes. I'm all over the place on what to even focus on. Last year I brought up the my personal case, but there's so many cases that fall under this 980, and one that really stick out to me the most. We can debate on time and crime and things of that nature, but I want to take that element out on this case. Ernest Jackson, we missed a vote by 1 last year. A senator quoted to me, "I know he's guilty, but..." I can't even lie, my whole garden got rained on that day. I had no idea laws and legislation were the depth that it was. I thought morale, right and wrong was morale, right and wrong. That's what I was told in court. I was wrong. I needed to be right. And so I bring him up because he's been in there for over 20 years for not only a crime he didn't commit, but a crime that someone else admitted to and was let off by a jury of his peers, and I do quote that because they were not his peers. For self-defense, 2 people. And so it's not one of those things, we had things thrown in our face like, hey, that's gonna mean everybody's gonna get out. No, this doesn't mean that if this passes, everyone just walks out. They still have to go through due process. And I'll let you know firsthand, there's a lack of accountability and oversight in parole, so that definitely does not mean everyone would get out. There's still a process. My Nana has been in prison in York Penitentiary here for over 30 years. Not only did she not commit a crime, she was trafficked and prostituted and feared for her own life. I know when we bring up sex crimes, it makes people uncomfortable, and they don't want to talk about what that really means. But I urge you to get outside your box. There's more than one Ernest. There's more than one Rahe. There was a time I was addressed as a menace to society for the first 30 years of my life. I wasn't a menace to society. I was a rose growing through concrete. And it took people like the Ernest and the Rush, the Shahids, and the Rahes, and those that had been through things that helped peer support me. And I'm where I am today, not because some correctional DOC, because there's things that go on in there that no one knows about. We have this blueprint of what we think is happening, and it would be great. But I'm proof in the pudding that is not what's happening. But I'm proof in the pudding that when we invest in our people, we can grow roses in concrete, and we can even give them soil in lieu of concrete. I'm proof of that. Ernest deserves to come home. Shaheed deserves to come home. Rahe deserves to come home, and others in their place also deserve to come home. And that is all I have.
My name is Sherry Brown, and I am from the United States of Omaha, Nebraska. I was born and raised in North Omaha. And I just actually came here to speak to the minds and the hearts of the people, humanity actually. Prison, I was told when I was a young age that it's to reform. And I'm 59 years old and I have not seen it yet. I've seen a lot of people go in and a lot of people not come out. And I accept calls to this day since I was like 17 years old. And there's a lot of them that's in there who actually gun down people. And there's a lot of them who end up not, who's in prison for gun violence, but they never actually gunned down nobody. But they took the responsibility because they didn't want to tell on anyone. I'm actually a mom whose son who was gunned down, he was 16 in 97. And I knew immediately I had to forgive the young man who gunned down my son, even before I buried my son, because I knew how and why. When you're in the prison of your own mind and you don't even know it, and you're locked up in it and you don't even know, you're not even aware nor conscious of it, that's a problem. So I know I had to forgive him immediately because I knew how and why he did it. But just so many others. That's why I receive calls on a regular basis every week, just to give them some sense of purpose. Because they didn't have it when they went in there. Before they went in prison, they was already in the prison of their own minds. Then they get sentenced into another prison. So they never had a chance. And these are teenage boys who is now in later years. Some got life. It gives me chills talking about it because I was told that people really don't care. All they care about is money, game, propaganda. I know in my mind and my heart of hearts, they're innocent. But nobody wants to hear that part. That's why I came here to speak for them and others. The young man who took my son's life, he got out and went back. Right now, I'm setting up to go and sit and visit with him. Because I want him to know, before he went back, me and him had a talk. One-on-one. And he asked for my forgiveness. And like I told him, I forgave you. The moment that I found out you're the one who did it. Because I knew and I understood how and why. And people need to really find out what's really going on in the minds and the hearts of these children. And it doesn't matter race or color or creed. In my mind, in my heart, because we all have a heart and a spirit. We need to operate from that. Not from the flesh, but the spirit. We're spirits first before we became flesh.
Okay. Senator Pansy Brooks.
I'm sorry.
No, Senator Pansy Brooks has a question.
Ms. Bartz, what an example you are to all of us. Thank you for coming and speaking.
I'm sorry?
today. What an example you are to all of us. Thank you for coming and speaking.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm Jason Witmer, JSONWITMER. I thought I would have a more unique, and I kind of presented this before, but kind of heard something. Okay. My voice is my own. I do not represent my place of employment nor any association that I am associated with. With that said, I'm a taxpaying citizen. I spend a considerable amount of personal time volunteering wherever I can assist. And many years ago, I also was incarcerated in Nebraska's prisons. So when I say I support LB 980, this is from many angles. That includes being a child who witnessed his mother beat to death. Often I think of how I've been destroyed, hearing my mother beg for my life, my baby brother's wailing, and him beating the screams into silence. And it still feels like it just happened to me. And yet it's my grandparents who buried their child, buried their daughter. I have a daughter, I have two now. And I can't even begin to imagine that. Not a life sentence, not a death sentence will ever heal these wounds. I am broken, I do not forgive him, I do not have her strength. I do not forgive myself. Yet I have found myself embraced by a community that has suffered harms at my hand and others in many ways, and that has impacted me greatly. And what also has impacted me is men with life or the equivalent sentences who chose to educate themselves and reach out to destructive lost boys who thought they were men like myself. Men who are often convicted of murder. It was them who saw value in me until I could see value in myself, until I could see value in others. It is that investment that returned me to free society as a neighbor worth having. I may be broken, but I will never be able to dismiss the value of people, even if many of them despise me for my past, my skin, my beliefs, my walk of life. No man, no woman is their worst deed, although many of us have to live with the harm caused. I do not forgive him. I often hate him, and I often hate both of us. But accountability is not gained by vengeance, no matter how it is disguised. I support all aspects of LB 980, including paroling those who have been given life sentences and comparable sentences. Maturity, self-education, hope, faith, time are all real things that change the person of who they were into the human beings who they are. And I would like to add one thing is, and I know the men inside watch, and Maurice, if you are watching, I support you for parole. And to return to your family, and may the community properly support you so that you can be both successful and regain the dignity and value that every human being deserves, despite what your past holds or what their past holds. And I ask that those of you who oppose this bill think of doing the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here today. Good evening. My name is Spike Eickholt, S-P-I-K-E, last name E-I-C-K-H-O-L-T, appearing on behalf of the ACLU Nebraska as a registered lobbyist. I wanted to wait to the end to let people testify. It's really difficult to follow such emotional testimony. So I'll just try to go through what the good points of the bill in kind of a technical way. I think what Senator McKinney's got, this bill does two things. One, it sort of broadens or makes it more flexible or somehow provides for an opportunity for the Department of Corrections to treat people humanely when they become ill. I wasn't involved in Mr. Valentine's case, but I kind of remember hearing about it from people who were. And I kind of remember hearing snippets of it where I think his illness was sort of diagnosed or came on rather suddenly. He was not actually parole eligible. He was in regular population, and they tried to somehow have him meet the eligibility for the medical parole. If you look at page 5 of the bill, section 4, that's the medical parole statute, and I think somebody testified earlier, it really only applies to individuals who are committed offenders who are not serving a life sentence or under a sentence of death and determined by the department to be terminally ill or permanently incapacitated. So it's kind of a narrow niche. And I think that some of the confusion was Mr. Valentine didn't fit that definition.
And then there was just sort of a problem with trying to getting them parole eligible. The bill does a nice thing. It just sort of broadens that category to kind of capture the Mr. Valentine's situation. Someone who suffers debilitating illness may be considered medical parole. If we look on page 3 of the bill, what Senator McKinney's done is, in my opinion, kind of a good idea. There's another statute that's referenced in this bill, and that is the statute that deals with work release or release to leave the prison facilities to look for a job or get an evaluation. And what he's got here is for maybe a way for the department themselves, not going through the board of parole, but the department themselves can determine that somebody's got a terminal illness, incapacity, or a debilitating medical condition, may leave the facility to receive medical care. That may be the way to go. I don't know if anyone in the department's going to be here, or if there's something that this one talks about the feasibility of that, but that might be the way to do it. If you see people working at the state office building, those people are on work release. They're not parole. They're on work release in prison, released during the day at work, either at the governor's mansion or the state office building or around here somewhere. And I think what he's trying to do with this bill is provide for an option, if you will, for someone who has what happens to Mr. Valentine, but the department can somehow just get them humane care in the final days of life, but they can be with their family. The 25-year parole eligibility, that's a good idea in my opinion. I know that the case law in Nebraska is probably kind of counter to that, but I think what Senator McKinney mentioned is kind of a pretty good argument. I don't know if I ever researched it, and that is Article 4, Section 13 of our state constitution provides that the Board of Parole shall have the power to grant paroles in all cases except for people serving sentences in treason or impeachment. And that would kind of imply that would apply to all of the cases, including people who are technically, at least not under current understanding, parole eligible. I'll answer any questions if anyone has any.
Okay, Senator DeBoer.
Thank you, Senator Luther. Are you familiar with the process for compassionate release as we currently have it? Have you seen it applied ever?
For work release?
No, the compassionate release portion, the medical release, I guess you call it.
Well, it was amended. It was broadened. Senator Crist had a bill a couple of years ago, and then Senator Bowles did it well. It's broadened, and I'm not sure how much it's used. So I'm not familiar. I've not directly represented some. I've represented people who've been in front of the parole board a couple of times, but never on a medical parole request. So I'm not, admittedly, not sure how it works. When I look at the different sections of the statute, it looks like there's a number of different logistical hurdles. You have to establish terminal status. That's determined by the department. Yeah, presumably you have to be in front of the board of parole at some sort of hearing or meeting or contact them somehow.
That's one of the things I was wondering about is it even practicable to go through all of these steps if you've got someone who's, very close to the end of life? And
My impression, and this is admittedly some conjecture, but I just remember hearing from people who were working on Mr. Valentine's case that it was just that feeling. It was wait, missed phone call, we'll get back to you kind of thing, and time was ticking.
thank you.
Thank you. I hope that the committee saw through the testimony that this bill is a good option for our state. It's not something that is far-fetched or just overly crazy, if that's the right word. I think allowing an individual to be able to spend the last days of their lives home with their family is something that I think is important. And what this bill does, it gives the Director of Correctional Services the opportunity to be able to authorize this instead of going back and forth between NDCS and the parole board. It's a better mechanism instead of having to go between two departments pretty much. As far as, the ability for individuals serving life terms to be able to go in front of the parole board and present their case, I think that's a good policy option as well. And in meeting with those individuals inside who are serving those lengthy terms, who are doing great inside, I think it's needed. I don't think any of these individuals will go in front of the parole board if they haven't been over the 25-year period or longer doing the programming, doing the peer mentorship and things like that. When you go to NSP and sit with the circle of concerned lifers, you see that there are many individuals that are tracking that course. Some are just starting, and some have been doing it for 30 plus years. And I think we should at least allow them the opportunity to sit in front of the parole board and make their case. And maybe they don't get out, but I think it's important to provide that option. And I was sitting here thinking, and I remembered in my head, and I won't say completely fact, but I'm almost sure it was brought up, a conversation about Ernest Jackson. It's my belief, and I'm almost sure of it, but I just don't want to be corrected. It's super factual, but I'm almost sure that Ernest was the one that was advocating for Xavier to get the help. And that's something that, like, when we vote this year or last year, and we think about his life and how he's serving that term, and he at least attempted to save another's life in his situation. And I thank you all for, the time, and if you have any questions, I'm open to it.
Okay. Any questions for Senator McKinney? Seeing none, thanks for bringing that bill.
No problem.